Am I wrong for winning $2.8 million in the lottery and deciding not to leave a single penny to my only son? I know how this sounds, but please hear me out before you judge me. My name is Linda, I'm 52 years old, and 3 months ago, my life changed forever in ways I never expected. But the real question isn't about the money. It's about whether love sometimes means saying no, even when it breaks your heart. This decision has torn my family apart, cost me relationships I thought would last forever, and made me question everything I believed about being a mother. But as I sit here today, looking at the lives I've been able to change with this money, I still don't know if I made the right choice. So I'm asking you, complete strangers on the internet, to help me figure this out. Because honestly, I'm drowning, in doubt, and I need someone to tell me whether I'm a hero or the worst mother who ever lived. Let me start from the very beginning, because context matters in a story like this. For the past 15 years, I've worked as a cashier at Morrison's grocery store in Columbus, Ohio. It's not glamorous work, scanning barcodes and dealing with cranky customers who think expired coupons should still work, but it pays the bills and keeps me busy. The store sits on the corner of Broad Street and High Street, right in the heart of downtown, where the autumn leaves create this beautiful golden carpet that crunches under your feet when October rolls around. Every Tuesday and Friday, like clockwork, I'd stop by the customer service counter after my shift and buy 2 lottery tickets with the same numbers I've been playing since 2008. 7, 14, 23, 35, 42, and Powerball 18. Those numbers weren't random. 7 was my lucky number as a kid. 14 was Michael's birthday. 23 was the date I got married. 35 was my age when I divorced. 42 was my mother's age when my father passed away. And 18? That was Michael's age when he graduated high school, back when I still had hope for his future. My ex-husband David used to laugh at me every time he saw those tickets stuck to our refrigerator with a magnet shaped like Ohio. He'd shake his head and call it Linda's retirement plan that'll never work, while he spent twice as much money at the corner bar every weekend. After our divorce 8 years ago, I kept playing those same numbers out of pure stubbornness, maybe hoping the universe would prove him wrong. The morning of March 15th started like any other Tuesday in Ohio. Gray skies, that damp cold that seeps into your bones no matter how many layers you wear, and the smell of coffee brewing in my tiny kitchen that overlooks the parking lot of my apartment complex. I woke up at 5:30 a.m., made my usual cup of coffee with 2 sugars and a splash of cream, and checked my phone for the lottery numbers from the night before while still in my pajamas. I almost choked on my coffee when I saw them. 7, 14, 23, 35, 42, and the Powerball 18. Those were my numbers, my exact numbers. The same numbers I'd been playing religiously for over 15 years. I must have checked that ticket 50 times before I believed it was real. I held it up to the window, compared it to my phone screen, even called the lottery hotline to verify the numbers again. $2.8 million. After taxes, about $1.6 million. More money than I'd ever dreamed of having. More money than my entire family had ever seen combined. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I called in sick to work, something I'd only done 3 times in 15 years, and drove straight to the lottery office in downtown Columbus. The building is this imposing gray structure that looks more like a courthouse than a place where dreams come true, and I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes trying to work up the courage to walk inside. By noon that same day, I was officially a millionaire. The lottery officials were professional but kind, explaining the tax implications, the payout options, the media attention that might follow. I chose the lump sum and signed more papers than I did when I bought my house. They handed me a check that felt both weightless and impossibly heavy at the same time. You'd think the first person I'd call would be my son Michael. He's 28, my only child, and despite everything we've been through, I love him more than life itself. But I didn't call him right away. Something in my gut told me to wait, to think this through. Maybe it was mother's intuition, or maybe it was 15 years of experience dealing with Michael's problems, but I knew this money would change everything between us, and not necessarily for the better. Instead, I drove to Schiller Park, this beautiful green space near downtown where Michael used to play when he was little. I sat on the same bench where I used to watch him on the swings, and I tried to imagine how this conversation would go. Every scenario I played out in my head ended the same way, with Michael seeing dollar signs instead of his mother, with our already complicated relationship becoming even more strained. What do you think about what I've shared so far? Am I being too cautious, or do you understand why I was hesitant to tell him about the lottery win right away? Let me know in the comments below, because I need to know if my instincts were right. Before I tell you what happened when I finally told Michael about the money, you need to understand who my son really is, because the Michael I raised and the Michael who exists today feel like two completely different people, and I'm still mourning the loss of the first one. Michael was born on November 14th, 1995, during one of those Ohio snowstorms that shuts down the whole city for 3 days. He was 8 pounds, 2 ounces of pure perfection, with these bright blue eyes that seemed to take in everything around him, and a smile that could melt your heart from day one. As a child, he was curious, intelligent, and surprisingly empathetic. He'd cry when he saw other kids get hurt. He'd share his toys without being asked, and he had this laugh that could fill up a room. In elementary school, his teachers always told me he was gifted. He learned to read before kindergarten, could solve math problems that stumped kids 2 grades older, and had this creative imagination that turned our backyard into elaborate fantasy worlds. I used to find him under his covers at night with a flashlight, reading books that were way above his grade level, completely lost in whatever story had captured his attention. High school is where things started to change, but slowly, so slowly that I didn't notice until it was almost too late. He started hanging out with a different crowd, kids who wore all black and skipped classes and had this attitude like the world owed them something. His grades slipped from A's to B's to C's, but he was still smart enough to maintain a decent GPA without really trying. Michael has always been complicated, even before the drugs, even before the arrests and the rehab stays and the broken promises. Even as a child, he had this way of pushing boundaries, testing limits, seeing exactly how much he could get away with before facing consequences. When he was 16, I caught him stealing money from my purse to buy cigarettes. When he was 18, he crashed the car I'd saved 2 years to buy him, and it wasn't covered by insurance because he'd been drinking at a party and decided to drive home anyway. But I kept making excuses, kept believing that deep down he was still that empathetic little boy who cried when other kids got hurt. I told myself that every teenager goes through rebellious phases, that he'd grow out of it, that love and patience would be enough to guide him back to the right path. Thank you so much for staying with me this far. I know this is getting heavy, but trust me, understanding Michael's story is crucial to understanding why I made the choice I made. The most important part of this story is still coming, so please don't click away now. The real problems started when Michael turned 21, right around the time he should have been graduating from college if he hadn't dropped out during his sophomore year. That's when the drug use began, or at least when I found out about it. Looking back now, I realize the signs were there much earlier, but love makes you blind to things you don't want to see. It started with marijuana, which honestly, I wasn't too worried about at first. Half the country has legalized it, right? But then it became cocaine, then prescription pills that weren't prescribed to him, then things I don't even want to name because saying them out loud makes them too real. Over the past 7 years, Michael has been to rehab 4 times, and I've paid for every single stay. The first rehab was a 30-day program at Riverside Methodist Hospital that cost $12,000. Insurance covered some of it, but I had to take out a loan for the rest. Michael seemed genuinely committed that time, attending all his meetings, calling me every day to check in, talking about his plans for the future with an enthusiasm I hadn't heard in years. He stayed clean for 4 months after that first program. 4 beautiful, hopeful months where I got glimpses of the son I used to know. He got a job at a local restaurant, started saving money for his own apartment, even began talking about going back to school. I thought we'd turned a corner, that the worst was behind us. But addiction doesn't work that way, does it? The relapse was swift and devastating. I found him passed out on my couch one morning, surrounded by empty bottles and drug paraphernalia I didn't even recognize. The second rehab cost $15,000. The third cost $18,000. By the 4th attempt, we were looking at luxury facilities because the cheaper options clearly weren't working, and that cost me $22,000 that I had to borrow against my house. In Sao. Total, Over the past 7 years, I've given Michael over $47,000. Money for rehab, money for rent when he got evicted, money for lawyers when he got arrested for possession, money for his car payments when he couldn't hold down a job, money for his phone bill because he said he needed it to stay in touch with his sponsor. Money, money, money. Always another crisis, always another emergency, always another promise that this time would be different. This time he was serious about getting clean. The last time I gave Michael money was 6 months before I won the lottery. And it's the decision that haunts me most because it showed me exactly who my son had become, and it wasn't anyone I recognized anymore. He called me at work on a Thursday afternoon, something he never did because he knew I wasn't supposed to. Take personal calls during my shift. I could hear the panic in his voice immediately, that high-pitched desperation that I'd learned to associate with his worst moments. He was crying, which scared me because Michael rarely showed that kind of vulnerability anymore. He told me he owed some dangerous people $3,000, and they were threatening to hurt him if he didn't pay by the end of the week. He said they'd already roughed him up a little bit, shown him they were serious, and he was terrified of what would happen next. The story came out in fragments between sobs and apologies, but the gist was that he'd been buying drugs on credit, and the dealers were done waiting for their money. Against every instinct I had, against the advice of the counselors I'd been seeing, against my better judgment that was screaming at me to say no, I emptied my entire savings account and gave him that $3,000. It was money I'd been saving for years, money that was supposed to be my emergency fund, my small hedge against uncertainty in a world that offers no guarantees to people like me. He promised he'd pay me back within a month. He swore this was the last time, that he was going to use this as his wake-up call to get clean for real. He looked me in the eyes and said, "Mom, I know I've let you down before, but this is different. I'm going to make this right, and I'm going to make you proud of me again." I never saw a penny of that money. Worse, I found out later through mutual friends that there were no dangerous dealers, no threats, no looming violence. He'd made up the entire story because he knew exactly which buttons to push to get me to open my wallet one more time. He'd spent the $3,000 on a week-long bender that ended with him passed out in a hotel room downtown, surrounded by people I'd never seen before who scattered like roaches when the police showed up. That's when I knew I'd lost my son completely, not to an accident or an illness or any of the things parents normally fear, but to addiction and lies, and the kind of manipulation that turns love into weakness. So when I won that lottery 6 months later, sitting in my car outside the lottery office with a check for $1.6 million, I made a decision that would define the rest of my life. I wasn't going to tell Michael about the money, at least not right away. And definitely not until I figured out what the hell I was supposed to do with it. Keeping that secret was one of the hardest things I've ever done. For 3 weeks, I walked around carrying this enormous life-changing news while pretending everything was normal. I went to work every day, scanned groceries, made small talk with customers, came home to my empty apartment, and tried to process the fact that I was now a millionaire. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I'd dreamed about what I'd do if I ever won the lottery. I'd buy Michael a house, pay for the best treatment money could buy, set up a trust fund that would take care of him for life. I'd imagined how happy he'd be, how grateful, how this windfall would somehow fix all the broken pieces of our relationship. But sitting there with actual lottery money in my bank account, all I could think about was that hotel room 6 months earlier, and the look in Michael's eyes when he lied to me about dangerous dealers, and the $3,000 I'd never see again. I realized that giving him access to $1.6 million wouldn't save him. It would kill him. During those 3 weeks of secrecy, I did something I hadn't done in years. I researched. I read books about addiction, about enabling, about tough, love, and the difference between helping and hurting someone you love. I talked to counselors, joined online support groups for parents of addicts, spent hours reading stories from other mothers who'd faced similar impossible choices. The more I learned, the clearer it became that every dollar I'd given Michael over, the years had been a small act of destruction disguised as love. I'd been funding his addiction while telling myself I was saving his life. I'd been enabling his worst impulses while believing I was being supportive. I'd been choosing temporary peace over long-term healing, and it had nearly destroyed us both. Slowly, painfully, a different plan began to form in my mind. What if I use this money not to enable one more addict, but to actually help people recover? What if I took all this unexpected wealth and turned it into something that could save lives instead of destroying them? I decided to use the lottery, money to start a nonprofit foundation focused on helping young adults overcome addiction, not by throwing money at the problem the way I'd done with Michael, but by creating real, sustainable programs that could actually change lives instead of just postponing death. I spent weeks researching different treatment models, visiting facilities across Ohio, talking to addiction specialists, and former addicts and family members who'd been through this hell. I learned about therapeutic communities, about the importance of long-term residential treatment, about how most people need multiple attempts before they achieve lasting sobriety. I found the perfect property in downtown Columbus, an old community center that had been sitting empty for 2 years after budget cuts forced the city to close it. The building was solid, built in the 1940s with good bones and plenty of space for both residential and outpatient programs. It needed work, but it had potential, and more importantly, it was in the heart of the city where people struggling with addiction could easily access it. The renovation took 4 months and cost almost $400,000. But when it was finished, we had a beautiful, welcoming space with 20 residential beds, group therapy rooms, a commercial kitchen where residents could learn life skills, and a garden area where they could grow vegetables and learn about nurturing something other than their addiction. But the hardest part wasn't buying the building or planning the programs or hiring staff. The hardest part was knowing that I was creating something beautiful that could help dozens of people, while my own son continued to spiral downward, and that he would see this as the ultimate betrayal instead of the ultimate act of love. I knew I couldn't keep the secret much longer. Word was starting to get around Columbus that someone had won the lottery, and in a city this size, it was only a matter of time before people figured out it was me. I needed to tell Michael before he heard it from someone else, but I also needed to tell him about my plans for the money. So I invited him over for dinner on a Sunday evening in early April. He showed up 2 hours late, which wasn't unusual, but he seemed different that night. His pupils were dilated, his speech was slightly slurred, and he kept fidgeting with his hands like he couldn't get comfortable in his own skin. I knew he was high, but I also knew this conversation couldn't wait any longer. After dinner, which Michael barely touched, I sat him down on my living room couch and told him about the lottery. I tried to ease into it, but there's really no gentle way to tell someone you've been hiding the fact that you're a millionaire for 3 weeks. His reaction was exactly what I expected, but somehow still more intense than I was prepared for. His eyes lit up like Christmas morning, and the sluggishness from whatever he'd taken earlier seemed to disappear instantly. He immediately started talking about all the things we could do with the money. We could buy a house together, Mom. We could travel. We could start a business. We could do anything we want. Notice he said we, as if the money was automatically ours, not mine. As if winning the lottery had somehow made him an equal partner in wealth he'd had nothing to do with earning. That assumption, that automatic entitlement, told me everything I needed to know about how this conversation was going to go. Then I told him about my plans for the foundation. I explained the research I'd done, the property I'd bought, the programs I wanted to create. I talked about how this money could help hundreds of young people struggling with addiction, how it could be a force for healing instead of destruction. The excitement in his eyes died instantly. He stared at me for what felt like an eternity, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to something that looked a lot like rage. Then he asked the question I'd been dreading for weeks. What about me, Mom? What about my future? What about everything I've been through? I took a deep breath and said the words that would haunt me for months afterward. Michael, I love you more than anything in this world, but I can't give you this money. It would destroy you, and it would destroy me watching it happen. But there's a bed waiting for you at the foundation, whenever you're ready to get serious about recovery. The explosion that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, and I'd lived through Michael's worst moments for 7 years. He screamed at me for over an hour, pacing around my living room like a caged animal, his voice getting higher and more desperate with every word. He called me selfish, heartless, a terrible mother who cared more about strangers than her own flesh and blood. He said I was abandoning him when he needed me most, that I was choosing random addicts over the son who'd always loved me despite my flaws. He accused me of wanting him to fail, of enjoying his suffering, of using his addiction as an excuse, to punish him for not being the perfect child I'd always wanted. The verbal assault went on for what felt like hours. Michael threw things, knocked over lamps, punched a hole in my kitchen wall with his bare fist. I'd seen him angry before, but this was different. This was the rage of someone who'd just watched their entire future disappear. Someone who'd been counting on money that was never theirs to begin with. Finally, he stormed out, slamming my front door so hard that the frame cracked and the sound echoed through my apartment complex like a gunshot. I sat alone in my destroyed living room, surrounded by broken glass and overturned furniture, and cried harder than I had since the day my marriage ended. But the real devastation was just beginning. Within 48 hours, my entire extended family knew about the lottery and my decision to use it for a foundation instead of giving it to Michael. He'd called everyone we knew, painting me as a monster who'd won millions and decided to give it all away instead of helping her struggling son. My sister Jennifer, who I'd talked to almost every day for 20 years, hasn't spoken to me since. She left me a voicemail that I've listened to probably 50 times, trying to understand how someone who claimed to love me could say such cruel things. She called me selfish, said I'd always put my own needs before family, accused me of using the foundation as a tax write-off to make myself look good while my son suffered. My brother Robert told me I was dead to him. Those were his exact words. "You're dead to me, Linda. I don't have a sister anymore." This from the man whose mortgage I helped pay when he lost his job 3 years ago, whose daughter I babysat every weekend for 6 months when his wife was going through chemotherapy. Even my 73-year-old mother, who'd raised me to believe that family comes first no matter what, called me crying and begging me to reconsider. She said she understood I was angry at Michael, but that cutting him off financially was cruel and unusual, that no mother should ever choose strangers over her own child, regardless of the circumstances. The guilt was overwhelming. There were nights I couldn't sleep, lying awake wondering if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. Maybe they were all right. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe a good mother would give everything to her child, no matter how many times that child had betrayed her trust, no matter how certain she was that the money would be wasted or worse. But then I'd remember that hotel room and the lies about dangerous dealers and the 4 failed attempts at rehab that had cost me everything I'd saved for 15 years. I'd think about the young man who'd once had so much potential, who'd been accepted to 3 different colleges, who'd thrown it all away for his next high. Today, 8 months after winning the lottery, the Michael Morrison Foundation for Addiction Recovery has helped 23 young adults begin their journey toward sobriety. I named it after my son, partly in hopes that someday he'd understand this was my way of loving him, and partly because every person we help is someone's Michael, someone's child who deserves a chance at a better life. 12 of our residents have graduated from the program and are living independent, sober lives. 3 of them have gotten full-time jobs, 2 have started college, 1 just got engaged to someone he met in group therapy, and another is training to become an addiction counselor herself. We've created something beautiful and life-changing, something that will outlast me and continue helping people long after I'm gone. But the cost has been everything else in my life. Michael hasn't spoken to me since that night in my kitchen 8 months ago. I've tried calling, texting, even showing up at his apartment, but he won't see me. Through mutual friends, I've heard that he's gotten worse. He lost his job at the restaurant, got evicted from his apartment, and is currently living with friends who enable his addiction because they're addicts themselves. My family relationships are destroyed beyond repair. I spend holidays alone now, heating up frozen dinners and watching Christmas movies by myself while my phone stays silent. Birthday cards go unanswered. The family group chat that used to be filled with daily updates and photos has been silent for months, at least when it comes to messages from me. Sometimes, late at night when I'm sitting in my empty house listening to the heating system kick on and off, I wonder if I chose correctly. Did I save 23 lives at the cost of losing my son forever? Is there a version of this story where I could have given Michael some of the money, set strict boundaries, hired monitors, and somehow made it work? Could I have found a middle ground that saved both my relationship with my family and my integrity as someone who refuses to enable addiction? But then I get letters from parents whose children are in our program. Letters thanking me for giving their kids a second chance when no one else would, for creating a place where hope lives alongside accountability. I get letters from the residents themselves, telling me how the foundation saved their lives, how they never believed recovery was possible until they found us. Last week, Sarah, our very first resident, graduated from community college with a degree in social work. She sent me a photo of herself in her cap and gown with a note that said, "Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Thank you for showing me that love sometimes looks like saying no." I cried for an hour after reading it, because those words captured exactly what I'd been trying to do for Michael all these years. So here I am, asking you the question that keeps me awake at night. Am I wrong for not leaving my lottery prize to my son? Did I choose helping strangers over helping my own child? Or did I choose tough love over enabling, hope over despair, the greater good over family loyalty? I've told you everything, held nothing back, exposed the worst parts of my story and the most painful parts of my heart. Now I need your honest opinion because honestly, I don't know anymore if I'm a hero or a villain in this story. Maybe I'm both. Maybe that's what being a parent sometimes means, making impossible choices and living with the consequences forever. Leave me your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me what you would have done in my situation. And if this story made you think, if it challenged you to consider the difference between helping and enabling, between love and money, between saving one person and saving many, please subscribe to this channel. There are more stories like this, real people facing impossible choices, and maybe together we can figure out what's right and what's wrong in this complicated, heartbreaking, beautiful world we all live in. Your next recommended video is about a woman who discovered her husband's secret family and had to decide whether to destroy his other wife's life by telling her the truth. Click to watch that story now.